When you hear the name Final Fantasy, it doesn't just ring a bell, it strikes a chord, summoning memories of sprawling worlds, epic battles, and some of the most iconic moments in gaming history. But it's wild to think that this legendary series almost never existed. Back in 1987, the Japanese game company Square was teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. Hironobu Sakaguchi, the game's creator, pitched Final Fantasy as what he believed might be the company's swan song, its final game. But instead of sinking into obscurity, Final Fantasy did the exact opposite. It became a revolutionary RPG that didn't just save Square but set the gold standard for the genre. The first Final Fantasy was released for the Famicom in Japan in 1987, and later made its way to North America in 1990 on the Nintendo Entertainment System. While Dragon Quest had already introduced players to the idea of a turn-based RPG, Final Fantasy upped the ante with more expansive storytelling, deeper gameplay mechanics, and a greater emphasis on player choice. It was the first game to feature a job system that allowed players to customize their party, a move that added replayability and strategy to the experience. It's impossible to talk about Final Fantasy without mentioning how its humble beginnings shaped its legacy. The title's unexpected success proved that games could tell grand, intricate stories on the same level as books or movies. That legacy has only grown with time, as Final Fantasy has expanded into a multimedia juggernaut with over 15 mainline games, countless spin-offs, and adaptations across other mediums. For a game that was meant to be Square's Final Fantasy, it's safe to say that this was just the beginning of something extraordinary. The story of the original Final Fantasy begins with a familiar yet timeless premise, a world teetering on the edge of ruin, held together by the faint hope of prophecy. This classic tale opens with the arrival of the Warriors of Light, 4 mysterious heroes who each bear an elemental crystal. These crystals have dimmed as chaos grips the land, and it's up to the warriors to restore their light and save the realm. While this setup might seem simple by today's standards, it was groundbreaking in the late 1980s, offering a narrative depth rarely seen in games of that era. At its core, Final Fantasy is a journey of discovery. The player isn't spoon-fed every detail of the world or its history. Instead, the story unfolds gradually as you explore towns, speak to NPCs, and delve into ancient ruins. Each corner of the map adds another piece to the puzzle, revealing a world plagued by corruption, monsters, and fading hope. The plot is structured around a series of escalating quests, from defeating regional threats like pirates and rogue knights to uncovering larger, interconnected forces at work. The narrative takes players across a richly imagined world, from verdant forests and bustling towns to mysterious underwater shrines and volcanic caves. Along the way, the Warriors of Light encounter an array of allies and villains, many of whom contribute to the game's mystique. A standout among the cast is Garland, the game's initial antagonist. What begins as a simple mission to rescue Princess Sarah from the clutches of this rogue knight spirals into something far greater. Without spoiling too much, Garland's role in the story takes a shocking twist that introduces time loops and paradoxes, concepts that were mind-blowing for gamers in the late 80s. What truly makes the story of Final Fantasy memorable is its ability to evolve from a seemingly straightforward quest into something far more ambitious. The inclusion of time travel in the late game adds a layer of complexity and raises philosophical questions about fate and free will. The reveal of Garland's transformation into chaos and the cyclical nature of the conflict was an ambitious twist that left players pondering long after the credits rolled. The gameplay of the original Final Fantasy is where the magic truly begins, laying the groundwork for what would become a hallmark of the series, a rich, strategic RPG experience. It took the basic blueprint of turn-based role-playing games and expanded it with deeper customization, exploration, and combat mechanics, delivering a game that felt groundbreaking in 1987. At the heart of the gameplay is the party system. When starting the game, players assemble a team of 4 Warriors of Light, choosing from 6 different character classes: Fighter, Thief, Black Belt, White Mage, Black Mage, and Red Mage. This system allowed for a high level of customization. The combat in Final Fantasy is turn-based, pitting your party against an assortment of enemies in random encounters. While this might sound standard today, it was a key part of the game's appeal at the time. Success required more than just mashing attack. Players had to consider enemy weaknesses, manage their magic points, MP, and prioritize healing or buffs. The inclusion of elemental spells like fire, ice, and bolt added another tactical layer, especially when facing off against the game's elemental fiends. One of Final Fantasy's most innovative features was its use of a class upgrade system. Midway through the game, players could evolve their characters into advanced versions of their original classes, such as turning a fighter into a knight or a white mage into a white wizard. This not only made characters stronger, but also expanded their abilities, giving players an incentive to push forward in the story. Managing resources was another key part of the gameplay. Gold, or gil, was hard-earned and needed to be spent wisely on equipment, spells, and items. Healing potions and tents were essential for surviving long journeys, especially since you couldn't save anywhere except on the overworld map. Magic spells had to be purchased and were limited by a charge system, meaning you could only cast a spell a certain number of times before needing to rest. These mechanics added a level of tension and planning to every step of the game, especially in the early stages. However, Final Fantasy wasn't without its flaws. The random encounter rate was notoriously high, making exploration a grind at times. Inventory management could also feel clunky, with limited space and no easy way to organize items. And while the combat was engaging, it suffered from a frustrating mechanic where characters would attack empty air if their target was already defeated, something that was later fixed in future entries. Despite these quirks, Final Fantasy's gameplay captured the imagination of players. It felt grand and complex in ways that few games at the time could rival. The original Final Fantasy may look simplistic by today's standards, but in 1987 its graphics and sound design were nothing short of revolutionary for an RPG. Designed for the Famicom, the game pushed the hardware to its limits, creating a world that felt immersive and expansive despite the technical constraints of 8-bit technology. Graphically, Final Fantasy was a step above its contemporaries. Its overworld featured diverse landscapes, including forests, deserts, mountains, and oceans, giving players a genuine sense of journeying through a vast and varied world. Towns were filled with small but recognizable details: houses, inns, shops, and bustling NPCs, all rendered in colorful, charming pixel art. The character and enemy sprites were another highlight. The Warriors of Light, while small and simplistic, were detailed enough to clearly convey their classes through visual design. A fighter looked like a tanky swordsman, while a white mage's flowing robes made them instantly recognizable. Enemy designs, however, truly shone. Yoshitaka Amano, the game's concept artist, created some of the most iconic monster designs in gaming history, from the haunting undead to the towering elemental fiends like Kraken and Tiamat. The sprites were filled with personality and menace. Seeing these designs come to life on an 8-bit system was a marvel at the time, even if they required a bit of imagination from the player to fully appreciate. One of the standout graphical features was the battle screen. Unlike Dragon Quest, which displayed only enemies during combat, Final Fantasy showed both the foes and your party members, positioned to the right. Watching your character strike with swords or cast spells while colorful animations played out brought battles to life. Spells like fire or lightning were accompanied by flashy effects, making them feel powerful and satisfying to use. On the audio side, Final Fantasy cemented its place in history with a soundtrack composed by the legendary Nobuo Uematsu. His work on this game marked the beginning of one of gaming's most celebrated partnerships, as Uematsu would go on to score many of the series' later entries. Despite the limitations of the NES sound chip, the music in Final Fantasy was memorable, emotional, and ambitious. The overworld theme was grand and adventurous, perfectly capturing the feeling of embarking on an epic journey. Town themes were soothing and warm, making them a welcome respite from the chaos of the wilds. Dungeon themes, meanwhile, leaned into darker, more ominous tones, heightening the tension as players descended into the unknown. And who could forget the battle music? The driving rhythm and high-energy melody made even random encounters feel urgent and intense. Perhaps the most iconic piece of music in the game is the opening theme, which would later become synonymous with the series itself. The Prelude, a cascading series of arpeggios, first appeared here and has since been featured in nearly every Final Fantasy game. It's a simple tune, but one that carries immense emotional weight, instantly transporting players back to their first adventure. In the end, the graphics and sound of Final Fantasy accomplished something remarkable. They brought its world to life. The game's art direction and music combined to create an atmosphere that resonated with players, turning what could have been just another RPG into an unforgettable adventure. Even decades later, these elements remain iconic, a testament to the timeless appeal of the series' visual and audio design. The legacy of the original Final Fantasy isn't just monumental, it's the stuff of legends in the gaming world. What began as a desperate gamble for a struggling company blossomed into a franchise that redefined the role-playing game genre and left an indelible mark on pop culture. It didn't just save Square, it became one of the most influential games of all time, a cornerstone of what RPGs could be. When Final Fantasy first launched in 1987, it introduced mechanics and design philosophies that would ripple through the industry for decades. Its focus on story-driven gameplay set a new standard for RPGs, proving that games could tell epic tales on par with novels or movies. Concepts like party customization, a robust job system, and epic world-building became staples of the genre, influencing countless titles that followed. Other developers took notice, with games like Phantasy Star and Dragon Quest incorporating elements that Final Fantasy popularized. The game's success not only saved Square, but also launched one of gaming's longest-running and most beloved franchises. As of today, Final Fantasy spans over 15 mainline entries, each pushing the boundaries of storytelling, graphics, and gameplay. The original game's DNA can be felt throughout, from the job systems in Final Fantasy III and V to the emphasis on grand narratives that reached their peak in Final Fantasy VI and VII. Even in more modern titles like Final Fantasy XIV and Final Fantasy XVI, you can trace their lineage back to the foundations laid by the very first game. Beyond the confines of its franchise, Final Fantasy elevated RPGs to mainstream status in the West. While titles like Dragon Warrior had introduced Western audiences to the genre, Final Fantasy cemented its appeal by offering deeper gameplay and a richer story. It played a significant role in growing the RPG fanbase outside Japan, paving the way for other classics like Chrono Trigger and Earthbound. The series' influence isn't limited to games. Final Fantasy has transcended its medium, becoming a cultural phenomenon. Its music, particularly the prelude and the victory fanfare, is instantly recognizable even to non-gamers. The iconic logo design, with Yoshitaka Amano's elegant calligraphy and artwork, has become a symbol of fantasy gaming itself. Merchandise, adaptations, and even orchestral concerts featuring Final Fantasy music have further cemented its place in popular culture. The original game's legacy is also tied to its willingness to experiment. The ambitious use of time travel and cyclical storytelling in Final Fantasy was ahead of its time, inspiring later games to push the boundaries of narrative complexity. Its fusion of Western medieval fantasy with Japanese artistic sensibilities created a unique aesthetic that would define the series and, in many ways, the RPG genre itself. Even the flaws of the original Final Fantasy have contributed to its legacy. The high random encounter rate, grind-heavy gameplay, and clunky mechanics have become points of discussion, serving as a benchmark for how far the series and the genre has evolved. Fans look back on these quirks with a mix of nostalgia and appreciation for how they shaped the game's difficulty and pacing. Modern re-releases and remasters of Final Fantasy have introduced the game to new generations of players. Whether through pixel-perfect remasters or versions that tweak some of the more dated mechanics, the original Final Fantasy continues to capture the hearts of gamers. Its story, gameplay, and charm remain a testament to what the series was and what it could become. Ultimately, the legacy of Final Fantasy is one of resilience and creativity. It's a reminder of how a small, underdog team can create something extraordinary, even under dire circumstances. The game didn't just live up to its name, it defied it, becoming not the end but the beginning of one of gaming's most celebrated sagas. For millions of fans, Final Fantasy was their first step into a world of magic, adventure, and imagination, a world that continues to grow and inspire to this day.